Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. Today we have Joe Weatherford. Her journey took her from Hollywood's party scene as a drug and alcohol addicted model to becoming a university professor and renowned TEDx speaker. After an arrest and failed suicide attempt, she got sober, earned a master's degree in human development, and now addresses the root causes of addiction through non traditional recovery approaches. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being on the show and just up front, thank you for everything that you're about to share and just being vulnerable and being able to talk about some of these things because we know it's difficult. Before we dive into it though, we do want to do an icebreaker as is, custom on the show. And today's question is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
It's a great question. So it's kind of a silly answer and it pertains more to my upbringing, but the character I used to resonate with the most is Eeyore. So I was obsessed with Winnie the Pooh, but for anybody unfamiliar, Eeyore is the donkey. And the best way to describe Eeyore is apathy. Just nothing gets him excited, nothing makes him happy. Life isn't worth living. It's just kind of this feeling of like, what am I doing here? And very much a martyr energy, right? Like the world is happening to me and for me. And so I think before I got sober and really worked on myself, that was absolutely the energy I was in. And that was a lot of what drove me to my addiction.
No, and that's a really good example. And I know that when we talk about addictions in general, that's probably one a lot would resonate with, at least in the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to be where you are today?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm trying to think of my story, it's helpful to almost start in the middle. Yes. Kind of the apex for me was 20 years ago. I'm in Hollywood. I live in this beautiful place near the beach. I'm dating an NFL player. I'm partying at the Playboy Mansion. I got tons of money. I just shot for magazines. So on the surface, my life looked really enticing. I mean, I guess to some people, that sounds awful to others, I'm sure. But, on the surface, it seemed like I lived this very glamorous life. And the reality was, here I am in these magazines. I never hated myself or my body more. I'm living in this beautiful place and I'm waking up on the kitchen floor, not knowing what day it is, what time. I'm missing shoots. I was horribly suicidal. And it was actually at that moment, that was the first time I went to rehab. I remember I called my mom and I just said, I don't think I'm going to make it. And that was that. That day, I found a place in Southern California, one of those bougie ass, really expensive treatment centers. And I went away for 90 days. And then I left the modeling industry, moved out of LA. And that was the first step on my journey. Like so many people, rehab the first time did not work. I actually quit hard drugs. So that was successful. But for me, alcohol was always my problem. Like, really, at the end of the day, that was the thing that was going to kill me. And so I stayed sober for a little while, but then started drinking again. And then it was just a series of events of like trying to stay alive. And it took another 8 years before I went to my second treatment center and actually got sober and then was able to start recovery because it's very different when we think about getting sober. We're just taking away the addiction, and recovery is really what's healing, the driving force behind it. So like if you think of a tree, addiction is the leaves. We're getting to the root. If we really want to live a beautiful life, that's such an important process. So I did. I went to a second treatment facility. That was 12 years ago. I quit drinking, back to school. I got a graduate degree, went into the counseling field, started teaching people how to become therapists. Yeah, just it's been this kind of beautiful unfolding to where I am now. I live in Los Cabos, Mexico. Everybody has a COVID story. Mine was quitting the university. I used to own a big martial arts school with my ex-husband. We sold that, retired down here. Then I went through a divorce. So it's been wild, but so much fun. And doing it sober has made it a really healing incredible journey instead of this like awful, horrible thing that I'm just surviving. So,
Oh, thank you for sharing that. It definitely sounds like you've had your share of excitement. Um, every journey has its challenges, and I'm just curious, what do you think was your biggest challenge that you had to overcome?
when I think back to kind of what was anchoring me, there were so many things. And when we talk about trauma, there's these big, massive things that have happened. I could say, oh, I was molested when I was 4. I was raised by alcoholics, or, I could go to all of these different events in my life and try to say that was the thing. But there was just this unbelievable sense of not belonging and self-hatred. Really, there's just no other way to say it. I was truly one of those people that came into the world, like I was saying, a little bit like Eeyore, like, what are we doing here? What is the point and the purpose of all of this? So when we talk about addiction a lot, it's very easy to focus on the negative emotions that we're trying to stop feeling, right? I don't want to feel my anxiety. I don't want to feel my depression. I don't want to feel my pain. But a lot of my addiction was about feeling something. For me, apathy, boredom, that is kind of the worst. I can deal with painful shit, but like when I don't feel anything, that's a really scary place. And so I think the self-hatred is one piece, the not belonging is another, and then apathy can be that third. And those have been my 3 main, henchmen to work with and learn from. And it's true what they say, the mess is medicine. So that's been my work, is to address those 3 areas.
No, and it's something that's actually pretty close to myself as well. I don't go into it much in the show. I've had my own, struggles with it. Was high functioning alcoholic too. And it's why one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on the show today, because I know that there are listeners out there too, um, that are going through, some form of addiction. And like you said, it could be any number of things. But really, I think I want to ask this because it has come up, and it wasn't something I even considered when I started, is that when you look at procrastination and you look at addictions, um, what what are the correlations between the two, do you think?
To me, when I think a lot about procrastination, there's this element of perfectionism that comes with it as well. Like I'm not ready to do the thing until it's perfect. At least for me, the procrastination becomes a way to continue to play small, but with the illusion of I'm getting big. And I think addiction can show up that way a lot, especially for high performers. A lot of my clients are men, CEOs, high performers, and they really see their, what I would consider addicted behavior. I mean, and two, we need to address that. Like, what is an addiction? It's behavior that has negative consequences that we are compelled to do. So it is beyond choice. But a lot of high performers see their addiction as their edge. Well, I can't quit doing that. That's what gives me my edge. That's what, allows me to operate at this high level, high stress, and I'm showing up for it. And so there are many correlations, because then we think that that's almost our power. We think that's what makes us better. We think that that's the thing that we need to cope, you know? So there's many parallels, but it's also just one more thing between who you are in the moment and who you are becoming. So if my ideal version of myself is out here and this is the reality of who I am, there's lots of things standing between the merging of those two. Procrastination can be one, addiction can be one. But I love that you acknowledge that high functioning within yourself, because so many people are just below the line of needing to do something. I was actually fortunate with my drinking. It was so hellacious. I never had the illusion of denial. I never even got to pretend like it wasn't as bad as it was. And I see it all the time where it's like your health is suffering, your relationship's suffering, your work is suffering, you're not feeling good. There's a lot of shame created, you're blacking out, whatever, but it's not quite bad enough where you have to stop. And that is its own hell. I was They are temporarily so I can tap into it a little bit, but I very much know that feeling.
And you're absolutely right. It could, part of it, I like that you talk about the high performers and talking about that edge. It's interesting because that sort of fuels their, I don't know if we call it a need to sort of, you know, have the magic, I don't know, magic mojo, whatever you want to call it, right? So how do you even begin to address that if, um, you know, they're having these perhaps negative consequences, but the negative consequences don't really outweigh the, perceived benefits that they're getting.
That's a great question. And I think it is that radical self inventory to look and see, truly the risk reward and then being completely honest about it. Because the reality is, for some people, the rewards may still outweigh the negative consequences at that point. And it may be very close, but it may just be a little bit tipped in that favor. And I'm one of those people that really believes if something truly, honestly improves your quality of life, is it that bad? I mean, I have people that get it in their head they have to stop smoking weed. And it's like, I have to, no matter what, I need to stop. When we really look at what is the negative impact on their lives, it's not much. And stopping weed becomes just one more way they can hate themselves. It's one more thing they're not doing. It's one more thing to distract from the real issue of things that they should be dealing with. Now I'm going to put all my attention on, I need to just quit this one thing. And it's like, do you? So when you start actually exploring and seeing like, okay, no, this is causing negative consequences, I do think I probably need to stop. What I would suggest is try. So just say for 21 days, I'm not going to do this thing and see what comes up. And it's about getting curious with it, right? Now, obviously, there are things you cannot stop instantaneously, like any central nervous system depressant, or if you're drinking daily, if you have any kind of DTs, you would never just stop alcohol. If you've been on Xanax a long time, you would never just stop that. You can have seizures. So obviously, you're at that level, though. We're having a very different conversation. If we're talking about somebody, though, that's just like, oh shit, I don't know if this is working for me, try and stop for 21 days. Do sober October, take a month off and see what comes up for you and get very clear. One of the things we don't ask enough is what's right with the drug, what's right with the behavior, what's right with the substance. What is the payoff? What does it allow you to feel or to not feel? And so that can be a beautiful way of just really seeing where you're at. And if you do set, okay, 21 days, I'm not going to do this, and you can't, then that opens a new conversation.
Gotcha. And then that makes a lot of sense because in those 21 days, you should be, well, the hope is that you would, again, like you said, get curious and see, is it, self-medication, for pain or, something that came up, or is it just, you want to feel something? Is there a big difference in the way that you approach those two scenarios between someone who's, self-medicating because they're coming from a place of pain versus somebody who just wants to feel something?
I mean, usually you're going to kind of land at the same apex with both scenarios, but yes, they are different. A lot of people use because they feel that social anxiety. And it's just, I mean, we'll use alcohol, most commonly used drug in the world. And the reason it's used is because now all of a sudden my social anxiety is down. I can be more free. I can socialize easier, right? It makes connection, right? We're wanting connection. And so, that's a much different conversation than somebody, let's say, that just lost a spouse and is grieving this huge death and is drinking to cope with that. So the intensity and the way that we would approach it is different, but so much of it always comes down to connection to self and to others. And then also any kind of repressed or unmet trauma. Even when we look at people that have difficulty feeling something, a lot of that stems from early childhood trauma. The brain was never given the chance to form in a way that the synapses are firing, the chemicals, the hormones are working properly, and so we become our own pharmacists. And that's really what we're doing. We're hijacking and playing with chemicals. What my body is not naturally doing for me, I can now take this substance to try and create that pharmacy within myself. So it is very different, but yet also the same. If that makes sense.
No, it does make a lot of sense because I was thinking back to my own personal case, and you're right. I started drinking because somebody made the comment that, oh, you're so much cooler when you're drunk. And I think that is where, I never really paid attention to it because I went through my own way to deal with it. But, you're right, because once that happened, that was sort of the door. But then I find it interesting that it transitioned into that high functioning one where, I would be the best at whatever I did, but I was always totally smashed when I did it. So it's a very interesting correlation, like you said.
Absolutely. And I love that you share that. Again, it goes to we believe that that's our edge. And the reality is with any addiction, it doesn't start off bad, right? There's a point at diminishing returns where this thing actually does fuel us. It allows us to experience and to feel what we want to feel. And then we hit that tipping point. And it's just very, very important that we are diligent and paying attention like when we're close to that line, because once you're past it, it's much more difficult to unwind that clock, as we get closer to it, to go, wow, okay, these are the moments to intervene. This is where to ask for help. This is where I allow in that feedback. And again, sometimes as those moments of shame arise or somebody telling us what to do, that happens a lot. It's not even us going, I want to quit. It's somebody saying you're going to quit or I'm going to leave you or you're going to lose your job, or the court system is like, guess what? You're going to quit or you're going to go to jail. So we have these external, reasons, right? Which can actually make many of us go into our little 4-year-old self, which is now we want to do it even more. And so it takes this mastery of self and just really identifying like, who am I? What do I want? Where am I headed? Are the decisions I'm making in this moment taking me closer to that? And again, intervening early is the most brilliant concept. It's this idea of bringing the bottom up, like instead of hitting rock bottom where you've just lost everything, which let's be honest, it's very hard to come back from. You have criminal charges, you've caught hep C or, something from using needles, whatever, there's comorbid health concerns, you've got cirrhosis. Like it's much harder to get clean when you're dealing with all of that, but it's also a great motivator. It's just like, so if you can motivate yourself and not let life do it for you, that's much better trajectory.
No, I definitely agree with that. Especially when you're talking about motivations and sort of inspirations, right? Um, like in my case, it was more inspiration because, I had this accident with my daughter, and I said, no, not ever again, right? So that was kind of my own tipping point. But when you're talking about your clients and you're talking about this 21 days, do you let's walk through that a little bit. So what does it look like when somebody comes to you? Like, how do they get to you? What's that process even look like?
Well, I'm really fortunate. I work primarily on referrals. And so I know my clients that come to me have a sense of who I am, how I work. I'm much more of a coach than a therapist. We do process negative emotion, but when you think about traditional therapy, a lot of it is retelling your story. And we need to be careful in the way in which we do that. If I am not in my power, and if I am at all hijacked out of myself at all, and I start retelling my story, I'm just re-traumatizing myself. I'm reaffirming to the universe what I don't want. And it's critical that we be able to tap into the emotion and then move it, which is what I love about coaching. It's so action oriented. And then there's accountability and then there's results. We can see you moving towards a goal. And I really, like I said, tapping into the emotion is key, but I don't want to stay there. And it's so critical. We don't just continue to speak what we don't seek, you know? Words are vibrations, they are spells. That's, why we call it spelling. And It's one of my problems with AA. I'm really grateful for AA. I think it's phenomenal. It has saved millions of lives and it's free. So I'm a big fan. And there is zero chance in hell you're ever going to hear me saying every day I'm an alcoholic and then reliving that shit. It's absolutely not true. I will never drink again because I would be an alcoholic again. But I'm not going to sit there and speak myself into the same energy and vibration when I was sick because I'm not. So we need to reassess that one a little bit, in my opinion.
No, you're you're absolutely right, and I've had this discussion with so many people, and I've I've been to AA, and again, like you said, it's not about you know discounting all the work that it's done, but I just think that words are powerful. How we speak to ourselves are powerful. Going back centuries, incantations, prayer, words do have power, and I think maybe we're starting to realize that more. But you know, stories and labels, right? So when you're going into your particular approaches, then I would take it that you don't focus too much on the labels. You just focus more on like you mentioned the actual feelings and how to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I mean, just when we look at the mental health profession as a whole, let's look at that like diagnosis, right? Why do we diagnose? We diagnose for one of two reasons, for medication or insurance purposes. So, if I'm going to start working with somebody, it's important that we or they have their diagnosis. It's like, cool, here's the DSM, the diagnostic manual. It is a whole bunch of mental health disorders that are basically ways of responding to stress. And under enough stress, we all have a little bit of that. So I'm not discounting the experience of being depressed. I know what that feels like, or manic, or any of those things. Those are very real experiences. But the diagnosis piece is very dangerous for me because when you say I am bipolar, I can't draw your blood and be like, oh, you're bipolar. I can see that there are highs and lows, and there is the way that the body is trying to recalibrate and find its center with these massive swings in extreme behavior. And it's a way of responding to stress. So diagnosis to me can be very, very dangerous. You start telling somebody you are bipolar and then they emulate that. I am bipolar. Now all of a sudden, this is who I am in the world. This is my identity. This is how I show up. And we should just be handing the book to clients and going, what do you think you are? And then we'll tell insurance, you know? And like the DSM as well, you had a bunch of people that needed to prove their worth in their profession. To talk to you as if you are your sickness. I'm going to talk to you as if you are your dis-ease, which again, what is disease? It is dis-ease. And we're just very, very, very stupid when it comes to the brain and medication and how to treat any of these things. I mean, I had the experience multiple times of going into a psych ward, getting labeled bipolar, put on all these medications, which, by the way, are so dangerous to give somebody when they drink, as well. And it's like, am I bipolar or have I just been doing an 8 ball of Coke for the last 10 days? I have not slept. And of course I'm high and low, but we want to just medicate things and then send people on their way because that's just the easy, quick fix. And let's be real. If there was a happy pill, we'd all be on it, like it, it doesn't work that way. And it's also really important to remember, and I'm not against medication in extreme circumstances, but we can't just medicate the grieving process. We can't just medicate learning coping skills. We can't just medicate away the human experience. That is literally why we're here. We are here to feel, we are here to experience life. And it's important, those highs and those lows, and learning who we are at those different points. Who are you when shit's going well? Who are you when everything is going? How do you show up? Who are you in those more humble moments when life is not going well? That's where we build resilience. That's where we learn who we are. And it's also what makes life worth living. If there was a video game and you just passed every level, there was never a bad guy, there's never any holes to jump over. If you just passed, no one would play it. That'd be boring as shit, you know? So it's like we need the experience of failure, of getting up, of resilience. And an important distinction as well. You know, so many people, especially when they're coming out of addiction, they're just surviving. And that's fine to a point. Resilience is great. Like, no matter what life throws at me, I'll survive it. But like, who's here for that? Grit is where we thrive. Grit is where we start developing that self-trust of like, oh shit, I can do hard things. Life doesn't always need to go my way. I love it when it does, but when it doesn't, I get crafty. I get in that trickster energy. I get creative. And I almost am like, bring it. And it's one of the best hacks for even anxiety. Whenever you're feeling something you don't want to feel, ask for more of it. When you're just feeling it, you're just like, oh God, this feels so awful and I hate it and I'm just regulated and it's like, okay, give me more. What you got, you know? And it really is how we move through. So anyway, that was a long rant on labels, but I am are two of the most powerful words we can ever utter into existence. So be very careful what follows that.
Yeah, and we don't really talk about that enough, I don't think, especially when it comes to mental health. I did want to touch on something actually as you were speaking there, and just over a couple of the other things. We talked about sort of external versus internal stressors, and I'm curious, in your experience, do these addictions normally come more from external pressures that are then internalized, or are they mostly internal?
I think when you have a strong internal sense of self, you are so less susceptible to external pressures. And so it is an internal experience, but then the external, when you're already vulnerable to it, can certainly be the thing that takes you out. And I think that that's an important awareness for people to have. Like, am I driven by my internal compass, or do I allow the world to tell me who I am, how I'm doing, and my value, you know? And especially, I think about all these kids growing up with social media now. I mean, that's just a crazy world to navigate. I feel so fortunate that I don't even think MySpace was out until I was in my 20s. You know, what a nightmare. So I think it's really important that we check in with ourselves, with our kids, with our communities. It's like, no, you need to know who you are instead of this idea of, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I'm who I think you think I am. And it's like it's nuts. And so many of the things happening in the world, I think, are an extreme pushback to the matrix of being told that you need to be a certain way, look a certain way, perform a certain way. And it's just not in alignment at all with who people are. And you start to really see this aggressive, like, this isn't working anymore. And so I think it's so important that we truly allow that internal voice to be louder, you know, because the world will pressure you. The world will reflect back some things that you need to see as well. You know, it's really important that we pay attention to external cues as well and be honest and explore what we need to. I just did a boga ceremony last weekend, and it was really fascinating because, of course, you know, I was a professor. I would lecture on projection, this idea of projection, and teach it to my clients. But I had a very interesting experience recently. I was dating somebody that there's just a lot of stuff that was very triggering for me. And whenever we're very triggered by something, that is a strong indication that that is an unhealed part of yourself. We all have preferences. Oh, I don't like this, or you do this and it bothers me. But I'm talking like, no, when something really gets you, there is medicine in that. So anyway, I'm sitting in this iboga journey and I'm just dealing with all this subconscious self-hatred that I have now made conscious through this medicine work. And I'm just feeling all of it. Well, this individual I was dating popped into my consciousness, and I could see where I projected everything I hated about myself onto this individual and then tried to fall in love with it. It's so fascinating. I mean, when we talk about therapy and the work and what we're doing, so much of it is being able to get below the below. into that unconscious programming. And some of that is through identifying old traumas, old behaviors, patterns, triggers. Like there's low-hanging fruit we can grab to use as tools, but it is fascinating as humans how much of our experience, up to 90%, is driven by the unconscious.
No, that's for sure. I mean, and we don't even realize it, right? But I mean, that's where the whole awareness thing comes in, right? When we start actually looking at why we do these things, which actually brings me to one of my last questions here as we're coming up on the time. I know that the one of the questions is related to the environment. So, how important do you think it is when we are dealing with addictions to get ourselves out of the environment and just whether that be for 21 days, 30 days, whatever.
Great question. I just want to go on a little rant to this because it's the nature nurture debate. So we've heard forever that addiction is genetic, and that is partially true. But through epigenetics, what we know is that we are not a victim of our genes. The environment determines what genes get activated or not. So you can think about this, like imagine you went to In-N-Out and then you left some food in your hot car. Okay, so you have food in a hot car versus if you brought it in and put it in the fridge. It's the same organism in two different environments, going to become two very different things, right? And so the same with our genes. We've seen this through twin studies. We have identical twins that are adopted out in different environments. They are raised differently. There is attunement. One of the things that people will be very frustrated by is they're like, I had a good childhood. I wasn't sexually assaulted. My parents were nice to me. Like, what the fuck is wrong with me? So attunement, though, as a baby is like, I see you, I feel you, I'm here, I'm attuned. It's a tuning fork. This one goes, this one goes. If we don't feel that, that can be the trauma that separates us. And it's so relative. Somebody's paper cut can hurt as bad as somebody's compound fracture. So when there is a lack of attunement within the environment as young kids, or, now we're adults and we're still needing that attunement, we don't have it, an environment isn't supportive. We have somebody who has seen us as our worst version of ourselves. Whatever the deal is, the environment is everything. It is what determines whether or not those genes get activated. It determines whether or not we are able to heal. The other thing that's really important is a study called Rat Park. We all know about the rat in a cage that would be given access to a lever. It would hit it so often it would overdose on cocaine. Well, all these scientists, Bruce Alexander specifically, decided to recreate it. Instead of a single rat, they put male and female rats. There was 16 to 20. They put them in like this rat utopia. There was waterfalls and plenty of space. So what's crazy is they got these rats physically addicted to morphine before they went into Rat Park. So they were actually withdrawing from morphine. And then they gave them access to a simple syrup and then one with morphine. In Rat Park, where there's companionship, all their needs are met, it's beautiful. Not a single rat ever used compulsively. So when you talk about the environment, it is everything. And that is one of the challenging things about addiction, right? Or even about somebody who knows they're hitting that line or getting close is, yeah, you need to change everything. The reality is you are not going to be at the bar with those same people on a Friday night and a Saturday night and a Sunday and maybe even Thursday, whatever it is, and think if nothing changes, anything changes. Of course, it's not going to. I mean, there are those rare exceptions, but no, you are creating a new social environment. Within the home, it's very tricky, especially when two people use together and then one person needs to get sober. I mean, these dynamics matter, but we need to be in a loving, connected environment. We do. That is how we heal. And there is no shortcut. I worked in treatment facilities and it was crazy because we'd see somebody come in, they've been on meth for 18 years. They're going to come into this bullshit facility for 28 days and then go right back living with their meth addict boyfriend. And then we're going to be like, oh, treatment doesn't work. It's like, of course it doesn't work. It is always a revolving door. When nothing changes, nothing changes. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a massive shift in connection, in daily routine, in priority. in coping mechanisms, in support. It is a big, big deal.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. We are coming up on the time here. So, do you think there's anything that I should have asked that I didn't ask, or anything that we maybe should have covered that we didn't cover today?
No, I loved your questions. I do think it's important. One of the reasons that I really love sharing my story is when I was trying to stop drinking, I didn't see a lot of role models out there that were happy. I saw a lot of people who had quit drinking, but I didn't feel that they were happier. They were just sober. And I'll tell you, I remember sitting there so many times going, if I'm going to be sober and miserable, I'm absolutely going to be drinking. And so I think it's important those of us in long-term recovery, like speak about the joy that comes with it. I mean, like I said, I've gone through a lot of gnarly shit ever since I got sober. So it's not to say that life is happy all the time, and nor should it be. That is not the point. And we get told that this illusion of like happy all the time is something we should be striving for, and that just creates a lot of bypassing and ignoring. And there is so much power in pain as well. But I want to just share that it's like it's not just possible to stop. It is possible to live a life that is more magical than you could ever imagine. I mean, I would have never ever thought I would be living in paradise, as a single woman in another country and just have the most amazing friends. And I get to meet people like you all the time and have these incredible conversations. And I'm just reminded on a daily basis that the world really is a friendly place, and that's an Einstein quote. And I think it's so important. He said that's the most important question you will ever ask yourself is the world a friendly place? And so even to bring it full circle to the Eeyore comment, right? Like, are you the martyr or are you the trickster? What we look for, we will always gather evidence to affirm. So if I am seeing the world as a beautiful place, I will continue to collect evidence and experience situations with people that affirm that belief. So get real clear on what it is you want to see more of in the world.
Very, very beautiful, very powerful way to sort of kind of bring this to an end today. Joe, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great. It's been honestly, I can say it's been one of the most refreshing conversations I've had in a while. Like, just again, just because of the subject matter, and just because it is so close to myself, and then so close to so many other people that don't get to talk about it, right? So again, thank you for sharing that. And just before we go, what is the best way, for anybody watching this that could maybe reach out, ask questions, or maybe even potentially work with you?
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me at recoveryremix.com or joeweatherford.com. Those are my websites. And then I'm active on social media, so Facebook or Instagram. And if anybody just has any questions, wants resources, wants to jump on a call, I'm absolutely here for it. So thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. And thank you so much for coming again, Joe. And to all our listeners, don't worry, we'll be putting that in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about grabbing a pen or paper or anything like that. And thank you once again for listening. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration today for yourself, maybe just try and be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.